My name is Matilda Rand, and I am welcoming you to Exploring Santa Cruz, a bi-weekly program on KSQD. In today's program, we will discuss public banking. For the first time in California history, legislation was introduced in the State Assembly that gives municipalities the power to create their own public bank. Assembly Bill 857 passed on October 2, 2019. In Section 1 of the bill, it states that the public banks are authorized for the purpose of achieving cost savings, strengthening local economies, supporting community economic development, and addressing infrastructure and housing needs for localities. It's the intent of the legislature that public banks shall partner with local financial institutions, such as credit unions and local banks, and shall not compete with local financial institutions. We will look at the why and the how of public banking. But first, let me introduce my guests, Randa Salek and Rafa Sonnenfeld. Randa Salek is a longtime local activist, got involved with public banking through Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is working nationally on the many public banks that are forming. She joined the Central Coast People for Public Banking about 4 years ago and has been learning way too much about banking ever since. Rafa Sonnenfeld is an organizer based in Santa Cruz with People for Public Banking and the California Public Banking Alliance. He works for a nonprofit focused on housing law and is active in local housing and homelessness politics. He's been involved in the public banking effort locally for a couple of years and hopes to see more public financing for affordable housing through systems like public banking. Welcome, Rafa and Randa.
Hi, Matilda.
Rafa, could you talk about why privately owned commercial banks are not benefiting local communities?
I'd be happy to. First, I should say that banking as a beneficial function of society has existed for thousands of years, since at least 3,000 years BCE. Modern banking has been around since around the 17th century. If banks didn't benefit their customers and society as a whole in some way, they wouldn't exist. But we believe that the degree to which banks that are privately owned have been benefiting society has not been equitable, since they're primarily engaged in the business of maximizing their shareholder profits, not maximizing the benefits to society. So whether it's investments in socially destructive activities like funding wars, addictive pharmaceuticals, extraction industries like fossil fuels, which contribute to global warming, their interests aren't serving the greater good. We feel public banks are a solution, a path forward, because they seek to address this inequality. They provide services that benefit the less fortunate of society. They serve customers who are underserved by our current system, such as minority and women-owned businesses, affordable housing developers, local banks and credit unions, municipal governments, as well as people who don't participate in the banking system at all, and people who are taken advantage of by payday lenders, check cashing providers, and those sorts of predatory loan providers who, when folks don't have access to traditional banking services.
Wow, that's quite illuminating. Randa, where did the idea of a public bank start in the U.S.?
Let me just say, to add on to what Rafa said,
Sure,
is that public banks can benefit everyone else, too. Not just frontline communities and minorities and people that have been shafted by private banks, but all of us, because public banks give back to the community. So if we want infrastructure, or if we want decent housing, or if we want our communities to respond to climate change, public banks can help us all do that. So they have a really wide reach. They started about 100 years ago in North Dakota during a time kind of like ours, where there was a huge separation between the rich and the poor. The populists in the Midwest hated the railroad tycoons. The railroad tycoons owned not only the railroads, but everything else, and they were really screwing over the farmers. So the farmers got together and they decided that they would build their own grain silos, and they would build their own banks. They would keep their money in their own hands. That was 100 years ago, and they've had 100 successful years. The state of North Dakota, doing business as the Bank of North Dakota, puts all of its tax receipts into their own bank, and the state uses that for whatever they want. They use it to reduce student debt. They use it to give small loans to farmers. They support local businesses. It's all under their own local control. And now many other countries have public banks. India, China, Germany, and here in the United States, the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma has their own public bank. And in American Samoa, as soon as the private banks pulled out, Samoans decided that they'll go for it and they'll make their own public bank. So we already have a few going now, and 20 states or more right now are considering stepping up and forming their own public bank.
That is good background. 100 years ago in North Dakota.
Yep, and still going strong in a lot of countries in the world. We just don't hear about it because the media is owned privately mostly, and we don't get that kind of information. That's why we have public radio, to put out that kind of information.
That's correct. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of that. So in California, AB 857, is it much different than what North Dakota is doing? Is it even more advanced? Tell me.
I'll take a shot at that.
Okay, go ahead, Rafa.
So AB 857 was crafted similarly to the Bank of North Dakota. What it would do is establish up to, I believe, 10 regional or municipal banks within California, up to 10 municipal public banks, and their primary purpose would be to provide services that the existing banking infrastructure doesn't provide through credit unions or local banks. And so they don't compete with credit unions or local banks. They actually sort of act like a commercial bank to loan money to local credit unions and local banks to expand their access to capital, make it easier for them to provide loans to people in the community. And then what we're also really excited about is they will be able to act as a cheaper form of financing for local governments to finance their infrastructure projects, to finance things like affordable housing, basically anything where a local government has to issue a bond, which is a fancy word for a loan. The public bank can potentially make the loan cheaper, make the interest that the municipality pays less, which means that we get more bang for our buck. Our dollar goes further, we can provide more services, and the types of services that we can provide, we can loan money to organizations and to programs that might have a lower return that a for-profit bank wouldn't be interested in loaning money to.
I can give an example of that. When Raf and I first started getting interested in this, Los Angeles was trying to figure out how much money they spend on their construction projects. And one of their highway systems needed upgrading, and they figured out that year they spent $16 million on upgrading that highway and $16 million on bank fees. So if we had a public bank, and Los Angeles is probably going to be the first one to have it in the state, then those fees would be so much reduced that they could get more, that's what Rafa was saying, more bang for their buck, right? They could get more of the money into actually building the infrastructure and less money into the pockets of the CEOs of these big banks. Right now, none of our cities can do that. None of our credit unions are big enough to actually do the payrolls for the city, let alone help them with bonds and stuff. So we're talking about another level that would help municipalities and counties have more money to do what they want to do with, and also support credit unions and the small local banks by giving them more borrowing ability. So it's not a consumer bank. It's not a public bank. Is not a bank that you and I will go to get a mortgage or a loan from. It's a bank that what we're calling agencies, like city governments or county governments, can use to finance their banking.
That was actually one of my questions that probably is in the mind of the listeners too, is can I go to a public bank and put my money in there and get a loan?
Well, actually, the answer in the near future will probably be sort of. We'd like to say yes eventually, but we're taking baby steps. One thing we're really excited about is this year, the California Public Banking Alliance introduced Assembly Bill 1177, which is the California Public Banking Option Act. And this is a program which helps serve the unbanked and the underbanked by giving folks who normally would have a hard time connecting with a regular bank or credit union in their community, a pathway that is administered by a state agency. Essentially, you have a bank account that has no fees, no overdraft charges, and it will be a really important way for folks who are exploited by these sort of quasi-banks, the check cashing companies and the payday lenders, to be able to deposit their paychecks, with an app on their phone. The details still have to be worked out, but it's a way for folks who are struggling at the margins to be able to access a less predatory, consumer-friendly source of banking.
Yeah, and that's a really exciting development for public banking. It's not what we're talking about here on the Central Coast. It's a state level, and it won't be a place. It will maybe be kiosks in certain banks, or, as Rafa said, an app on the phone. But that way we can get rid of payday lending. Right. And ideally, that would happen in the country if we had postal lending. People have said post offices are everywhere, all over the country, and I'm old enough to remember when we did a little bit of straight banking with the post offices.
Right.
So this would be a very simple banking, checking account, a savings account, no fee account for people who need that. And it could be nationwide, but of course that depends on what administration we get and we see in the future.
Good.
So California is going to be the first state to do that.
Yeah, let me take a break first and let people know that they're listening to Exploring Santa Cruz on K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz. And the topic is public banking, and my guests are Randa Solek and Rafa Sonnefeld, both working on public banking. Just a little while ago, we said, can individuals put their money in there? AB 857 is not set up for that yet. That we may need the passage of 1177. So my question then is, who puts the money in the bank?
The money for a public bank, for example, a regional bank created under Assembly Bill 857, would come from the government. For example, the Santa Cruz County may have a rainy day fund. It has investments that it saves its reserve funds, and it would be depositing its reserve funds into the bank instead of into a traditional Wall Street bank. So the municipal government itself would be the customer as well as the owner of the bank.
Right. So would it also be like if I pay my property taxes, would that be going into a public bank if we have a regional public bank?
Potentially could be. The state controller's office and county fiduciaries really want to make sure that the county and the city's finances are secure and safe. So we're probably not talking about all of the money from a municipal government being deposited into one institution. They want to manage their risk, and so there'd probably be a portion of their assets that they're depositing into their public bank.
Anything to add, Randa?
Yeah, really, Matilda, this is still all up in the air right now because each section of California that's doing this is working it out for ourselves. Los Angeles is huge, has its own money. Los Angeles is going to go ahead and see if they can deposit their LA taxes in an LA public bank. And they're the furthest ahead. They have already progressed pretty far with this. So they'll probably be the first one. As Rafa said, we're allowed to have 10 of them over the next, 7 years. We're allowed to have 2 at a time. Mm-hmm. And LA will probably be the first. San Francisco is working hard on it. They might start out with a revolving loan fund for a few years until they get good credit established, and then they'll turn that into a public bank. We also have East Bay, which includes Oakland and Alameda and other places, and Santa Rosa is working on it, Humboldt, Pomona Valley, San Diego. Santa Barbara is with us. What we decided in the Central Coast is that none of our counties are big enough or rich enough to have our own public bank. We're not like San Francisco or LA.
Right.
So by combining the counties and some of the cities together, then we do have enough money to do this, and we do have enough political will.
And that's probably why Rafa was talking about regional public banks.
Right, and that's why ours would be a regional public bank. Mm-hmm. Right, so we're calling it the Central Coast Public Bank, and we have counties from Santa Barbara to up here involved in that. We had a meeting. My supervisor from District 2, Zach Friend, called a meeting and invited all the elected officials from 5 counties, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito. and the cities within those counties. Invited all those people to a meeting, a virtual meeting, and they had that about a month and a half ago. The meeting was to interest those agencies in paying for a viability study. That's our next step. A viability study will have professional banking consultants take a look at the budgets of all those counties and the cities and see if we can pull this off. So a viability study is not that much money, probably around $150,000, and Santa Barbara, Monterey, Santa Cruz counties are in, and so are about 6 or 7 cities in there. So we probably have enough money together now to start a viability study, and we'll hire a consultant who's experienced in this. And then it'll take probably a year, I'm guessing, for that person or people to look into the budgets of all these different agencies and see how we can really do this. None of the treasurers of the counties will allow us to put all the money from the county in, just as Rafa said.
Mm-hmm.
How much funds are available, really? What could be done to fund a bank like this? Capitalize a bank takes a lot of money, but it might really pay off well for these places. So that's what a consultant will be studying.
One thing I think it would help to clarify for the listeners is there's a difference between depositing money into a bank and capitalizing a bank. For example, you or I, if we go to our local branch of, say, Wells Fargo or Bank of America or something, and we deposit $100, that money is guaranteed by the capital of the bank. So Bank of America has to have $100 available to pay me back when I want my money back. So it's not enough to just simply say we're going to put our municipal or county funds depositing into this bank. We have to also set aside some money that we can't count on in an emergency. Essentially, it's an investment into the infrastructure of the bank itself. Sort of like if you were issuing an IPO for a company, you would raise stock, and the investors investing into that company would own a share of the company, and the money that they would be paying to the company would be the capital of the company that the company could then use to hire staff, so forth. And so that's a similar idea with the capitalization of a bank. We need to identify sources that are illiquid, maybe a bond issuance or something like that, to allow the bank to leverage the funds that municipalities would be depositing into the institution.
Do you see why I said that, Matilda? There's like a little bit more than you really want to know about banking. It's now that it's in that stage, It really is professional banking activities that need to happen now. So if we have this viability study, the viability study will tell each of the counties and the cities, well, this is how much it will cost to start up this place. It's like when you buy a house. You know, you put a lot of money into the house, and it sits in the house. It's invested. You're not selling it right away. You're using the house, and that's what it is with a bank. You have to put a bunch of money in to have enough capital for the bank to use. And then the daily transactions are on another level. And there's something else called collateralization, so there's quite a few things that have to be worked out, but the counties are happy to be working together, and we have some great people on the Central Coast Public Banking Committee from all the different counties, and some of the elected officials are pretty interested in what this can do for them. It's not out of the goodness of their hearts, it's because it would really be wonderful if we had enough money for affordable housing, or if we had enough money for infrastructure.
You already talked a little bit about it, that the state is careful. AB 857, I think, set it up pretty thoroughly. 2 licenses issued each year, and then within 7 years, total 10 licenses. And they have to be assuring safety. And from the California Public Banking Alliance website, I learned that there is a strict oversight, 4 levels. There has to be an independent board of directors of the bank. The city or county is the owner of the bank, and then also the Department of Oversight, Business Oversight, has a role, and of course also the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So I'm mentioning the California Public Banking Alliance because you are part of that, Rafa, and
I should clarify, the People for Public Banking Central Coast is a member
Member.
organization of the
Right.
California Public Banking Alliance. And I've been organizing with CPBA.
That's what I wanted to say, and I thank you for clarifying that. How do the different counties right now or the different regions work together, if there is anything?
We have monthly calls where we share information. We have email listservs, and it's really a community of folks who are trying to help each other establish these institutions. So it's knowledge sharing, it's political strategies, resources, just folks really coming together to figure out how to make this happen.
Excellent.
And governments too, because
Yeah.
if one county writes a resolution, then the other counties can use that format. And we're of course learning from the state what each of us is going to have to do. So
Right.
they're working very nicely together.
In the back of my mind, there was this question, so how are people responding? And you already mentioned that certain representatives are working, different areas, regions in the state are working together. Would you think in general there is a positive response from the legislature, from local governments, from people in the know? Is there a positive response to it?
Absolutely. I think people recognize the benefits and the real need to have institutions like this. I'd say the only naysayers are, who would you expect? The banking lobby, who try to scare off folks by saying that these institutions that have an incredible amount of oversight, an incredible amount of public transparency and public governance will somehow be riskier than for-profit banks who are engaged in practices that are going completely unregulated.
Randa, final words from you because we're almost out of time.
Well, I think that you can see how people are responding by looking at a map of the country. So many states are going for this. I think after Occupy, people said, okay, we know the big banks are not our friends. What else can we do? And this is a really logical outgrowth of that can really help everybody. So each state will adapt it differently, but we're all on our way.
Right. And so in order for people to learn more about this, you gave me some websites that people can go to. One of them is CaliforniaPublicBankingAlliance.org, CaliforniaPublicBankingAlliance.org. The other one is PublicBankingInstitute.org, PublicBankingInstitute.org. And then, of course, locally, we have peopleforpublicbanking.com, which is for the people for public banking in Central Coast. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have a lot of news on your website, Santa Barbara, Monterey, Santa Cruz counties, and a number of cities in those counties. You all united, as you said, in an attempt to establish a public bank on the Central Coast. And people can also reach you on Facebook.com/People for Public Banking. Anything else I forgot?
No, thanks, Matilda. Good.
Thank you so much. This has been in my mind that we definitely have to change how we do banking. And I'm really pleased to hear that the money that goes in basically goes back to the community and it doesn't go into some shareholder's pocket elsewhere outside.
Yeah, I would just add one thing. If people want to get involved, if they want to make sure that their city is participating in the viability study process, which is sort of like ringing the bell to getting into the public banking club, they should be reaching out to their city councils.
Perfect. Thank you, Randa. Thank you, Rafa.
Thanks, Rafa. Thanks, Matilda.
You've been listening to Exploring Santa Cruz on KSQD.org. The topic was public banking, and my guests were Randa Solek and Rafa Sonneveld, who, as you heard, are very much involved in this unique and exciting development in not just California, but the rest of the world. My name is Matilda Rand, and I welcome you to listen to Exploring Santa Cruz every 2 weeks on KSQD Santa Cruz.